Hey IT friends, how's it going? So as many of you are probably aware now, recently the Federal Trade Commission passed a rule that bans non-competes. And there's been a lot of talk about this, what that means from sort of an ownership standpoint, acquisition M&A standpoint in our space. I don't care about that. Let's talk about what this means if you're an employee, and specifically why I don't think this is as big of a deal as it's being made to be on our MSP and our sysadmin, and why, if you are an employee in the IT space, I think you should put down your pitchforks and your torches and take a couple of calming breaths before you do something you're going to regret. Because it doesn't work the way I think a lot of you think it works. And we should talk about that a little bit. Because the world isn't quite the same for us employees as it is for the lords and ladies that rule over us. So, for those that don't know, there is a pretty common document or pairing of documents that a lot of us have signed at some point in our employment history, especially in this space. Fairly common in the sort of like startup tech culture world to have something like this. Not really sure why it trickled over into MSP land, but it's here. And so we have non-competes and we have non-solicitations. And I want to start by explaining what the difference is at a very basic level, because I think they get confused a lot. And I think that leads to some of the initial rabble that I see on forums that are populated mostly by employees. So a non-compete pretty much means exactly what it says, that you are agreeing for a period of time to not directly compete with the business that you signed the agreement with. And that's a pretty wide interpretation. It can mean different things in different places, which is why, and I will get to this later, it has largely not really been enforceable anyways for a very long time. In a lot of states, a long time ago, already made it next to impossible for anybody to litigate a non-compete against an employee, because guess what? You have a right to earn a living doing what you do. And the pretty much every higher court, anytime this has actually come up, has supported that an employee has a right to earn a living doing what they do. But we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's the entire premise of the video, that it doesn't matter about it going to court. So that's a non-compete. Let's talk about a non-solicitation, because a non-solicitation is the one that's probably far more likely to burn you, and those haven't gone anywhere. And I think that's where a lot of employees don't really understand the difference and get really riled up. So a non-solicitation basically says that, and this is super common, not only to have employees sign this, but to have it in a BAA agreement, or between a client and the MSP. Everybody could be signing one of these. And it basically says that for the duration stipulated in that non-solicitation agreement, that all parties concerned aren't gonna step outside the chain to solicit to one another. So if you're a client, that means I'm not going to poach your employees, and hopefully the client won't poach mine. It means that if you're my MSP employee or my sysadmin employee, and for some reason you leave, for whatever reason you leave, that you're not going to try to poach my former staff, my former clients, so on and so forth. And non-solicitations exist in terms of like the enforceability. They're pretty enforceable, because that's basically protecting, this is the wrong words, but that's basically protecting sort of the intellectual property of the business, especially a service-based business. You're once again, wrong word choice, but like your intellectual property is your staff and your processes and your clients, your book of business. And so of course you need to protect that a little bit. And I think we would all agree that, as much as, and I'm definitely one to speak, as much as I love some of the people I've worked with in the past and would love to hire them and work with them again, it is kind of a dick move if you leave a job and then immediately try to, steal staff or clients from that job. So beyond the fact that non-solicitation is pretty enforceable, kind of a jerk for, it's kind of like taking your friend's girlfriend. Like, that's not cool. So Now that we've gotten past what they both are, let's talk about why I don't think this is as groundbreaking of a big deal for most of you as it's being made to be. So I'm here to tell you that regardless of the legal ramifications and the legality of either one of those documents, I don't need them to be legal to friggity frig you and ruin your career. And that's the part that I think constantly is missed by employees. When I first started working in an MSP, and I was first introduced to the idea of an MSA or a contract, in my head, and this was young Dean, in my head, I'm like, this is a contract between two business entities. It is written in stone. No one shall violate it. And then you know what I realized? Contracts don't fucking matter. They are literally only worth as much as either person who signed it's desire to enforce it. And all the time, and we've all seen this, and we've all seen it and read it. We see all the time when MSPs are like, hey, my client did this or that, and it's against it in my contract. What do I want to do? And everybody chimes in, take them to court, get a lawyer, sue them. Anyone here actually taken someone to court with a lawyer where that wasn't paid for and managed by like your insurance company or something? Yeah, that's not inexpensive, both in terms of cash, but also time invested, research, preparation. That's a big undertaking. My old boss had a phrase he used to say, which is once you go to court, everybody loses. And so getting back to this idea of like contracts in general, a lot of stuff in contracts doesn't really end up getting enforced, because to actually enforce it's probably going to cost more than you would get from enforcing it. And so that I say all of this because I need to hammer home the point that, like, so folks are basically like, listen, I don't have a non-compete anymore. This is great. I can finally, quit my job and open up competing MSP next door or go to the competition. I've always wanted it, whatever. And like, yes, you can. You've always been able to do that. And whether or not your old employer could sue you for it doesn't matter, because they probably don't need to still ruin you. And that's the part I want all the employees here to understand. This is a small industry. And not just the MSP space, the IT industry in general is a relatively small industry. It is not uncommon in a given municipality or region that all of the people who are of significance within this industry know each other. I would compare it to, the ye olden days in the medieval times when the local lords of the kingdom, they all had to know each other a little bit, because there was no Google, there was no photo ID. So you had to know that, Lord Farquaad was Lord Farquaad by like seeing him and hearing him. Like, that was important. In this industry and most niche verticalized industries are like that. So here's the thing. Remember we said before that breaking a non-solicitation kind of makes it like you're somebody who takes other people's girlfriends, which is not going to be regarded very well. The business owners are also going to mentally treat the idea of a non-compete the same way. So that means they're going to tell everyone else, or could. And that's what's the most important part. So I will give y'all an example of this. We had an employee in the before time, and this employee ended up giving his notice to go work for our closest in-market competition. At that point, it was another MSP, literally right down the street. And while we wish this employee no malice, it concerned the owner of the MSP at the time that this employee, with what they knew, and because they were in kind of a sales role, going over to work for this competitor could be damaging. So he called the owner of the other MSP, because even though we're competitors, everybody knows everybody. And he said to the owner of the other MSP, hey, I heard such and such was going to be working for you. Were you aware they had a non-compete and non-solicitation with us? And do you know what the other MSP owner said? I was not aware. I'm sorry. I don't want to cause trouble. I'd hope you do the same thing for me. we'll rescind the offer of employment. And they did. And that employee no longer had that job. So now they didn't have a job with us, and they didn't have a job with that other MSP. That's how easy it can happen. And in this case, all of the owners involved weren't bad guys. Like, there was no like, don't hire this guy, he's a jerk. It was just, are you aware that he's under these documents? That's how easy that works. Don't need to go to court, don't need to enforce anything, don't need to get lawyers involved. So I say this to all of my employee friends who are the sysadmin and MSP space, not because I'm trying to put the fear of dog into you, but because I just want you all to remember that labor laws are important, but you live in an organized society, at least for now we do, and usually who you know is a little more important. You just got to be careful. And while you might be technically and empirically correct and might actually win if it went to a court, it's got to go there. You've got to be able to afford to do that. You've got to have the time to do that. And you've got to have the emotional energy and knowledge to do that. And most of us don't. And despite the handful of stories you'll see passed around where people are sort of white knighting about how they've taken this person to court or that person to court, no, they probably haven't. The idea of how litigation happy Americans are is grossly overinflated by the media and movies and TV. It's actually pretty rare to take. Never mind frivolous lawsuits. It's actually pretty rare to even take non-frivolous lawsuits from an individual standpoint anywhere, because it's quite expensive and it's a lot of work. So I just want you all to remember that before you march into your boss's desk, take a giant dump on their desk, walk out the door, flipping the bird to everybody to go start your own business or work for the competition. Yes, you may be legally entitled to do that soon. It's still probably a really bad idea to do it like that, because it doesn't really matter how legally entitled you are at all. And one final thing I do want to mention, I am not an expert on any of this at all, but there is some debate if the Federal Trade Commission has even the ability to pass the rule they passed. So keep that in the back of your head as well. But as I said at the beginning of this, it largely, if we're talking about from a will this stand up in court standpoint, there's a number of states that had banned non-competes a very long time ago, and many more that had significantly restricted them to basically, I'm paraphrasing, but basically be like, listen, you can't open, if you work for Acme, you can't open Acme 2 next door in the same strip mall. That's not cool. Like, so there's been a lot of limitations like that to prevent these from being abused, because I think everybody agrees, like a 500-year, you can't work anywhere on this continent in this industry. Those types of things are ridiculous and already weren't allowed. So I don't know, this is as big a deal for us working people as we'd like to think it is. But as always, don't be a dick. Be careful. It's a small industry. You'd be amazed how easy it is for a short-sighted decision to end you up in a position where suddenly your career prospects and options are quite limited. And this is not 4 years ago when, there was a massive demand for remote technical employees from anywhere. Yes, there's still a big demand. There are a lot of tech jobs, but the power shift is starting to equalize back. So don't get too cocky, employees, and think that you still hold all the cards. You only hold some of the cards. Just be smart about it. Have a great Tuesday. And I hope all of you, regardless of what happens with this non-compete, I hope all of you are making an effort, specifically all of you employees, all you sysadmins, MSP employees, update your LinkedIns, put your accomplishments and your achievements, put your certifications, keep all that up to date all the time. Even if you love your job, you should be proud of what you do. You're all amazing. Have a great Thursday.